Hello good people, it's an honor for me to speak in this video. Let me introduce myself first. My name is Dea Mutiara Arhal. I am from English Literature of Pamulang University. Now, I want to present about the issue reflected and related theory in the zoo story by Edward Albee. So, let's go to the next slide and we will find the table of content. And as you can see, here is my table of content, and this video consists of the summary of the story, relatable theory, the issue reflected, related and suitable theory, conclusion, and my references. So let's move on to the next slide. We will find, so let me introduce this play first. This play is setting is 1959. The one-act play revolves around a conversation between Peter as a middle-class publishing executive and Jerry as an eccentric transient. So they chat cordially in Central Park, but their discussion gradually descends into violence because in this story, Jerry is the active one because Jerry asks a question all the time to Peter and Peter just answers the question. He is not asking anything because actually he doesn't want to talk to Jerry. And suddenly Jerry starts to ask Peter questions, and although it is obvious that Peter is not interested in communicating with a man like Jerry, so Peter just answers because of his politeness. So in the course of the play, it becomes clear that Peter is not able to understand the messages of Jerry's stories, and Jerry behaves more and more aggressively. And the last scene is when Jerry began to argument. So Jerry wants to Peter fight for the bench, for his bench, and Jerry bring a knife and manage to wound himself badly with it. So Jerry is dying, but Jerry is asked to Peter to run away. Then Peter carries out Jerry's instruction and run away. Then Jerry dies alone in Central Park. After read the play, many of issue and theory that we can found, but it take a long time an explanation if I put all of this. So I just put some issue and theory. There are about the alienations, so consists of social class, isolated self or social isolation, and family disintegration. And let's move on to the next slide. We can find the first issue. So the first issue is social class. And the definition of social class is based on what I found in the article. Karl Marx defined social class as a social relationship rather than a position or rank in a society. In Marx analysis, the capitalist class could not exist without the proletariat, or vice versa. The relationship between classes is a contradictory or antagonistic relationship. One has that struggle, conflict, and contradictory interests associated with it. The structure and basis of social class may be defined in objective terms as groups with a common position with respect to property or the means of production. So, if we move on to the next slide, we can find the theory. As you can see in this slide, there are theory of social class. So, according to the Marx theory of social class, he is focused on the classes. Which of these classes will lead to differences in social, political, and economic terms in a society? So, let's talk some points from Karl Marx. The first one is class as social relationship. At several points, Marx notes how the class defines itself, or is a class only as it acts in opposition to other classes, referring to the emergence of the bourgeois as a class in early capitalized Europe, makes note how the separate individuals forms a class only insofar as they have to carry on a common battle against another class. Otherwise, they are on hostile terms with each other as competitors. And it is from Guidance and Help, page 20. And the second one is class structure of capitalism. In Marxist theory, the class structure of the capitalist mode of production is characterized by the conflict between two main classes. So the first is bourgeois, is the capitalists who own the means of production, and much larger proletariat or working class who must sell their own labor power. So this is a fundamental economic structure of work and property, a state of inequality that is normalized and reproduced through cultural ideology. So for Marxists, every person in the process of production has separate social relationship and issue. So along with this, every person is placed into different groups that have similar interests and value that can differ drastically from group to group. So dalam bahasa Indonesianya circle. Jadi masyarakat atau manusia terbiasa dengan grup dalam grup dalam grup. Jadi mereka hanya berkumpul dalam satu circle yang sama. Biasanya circle-nya itu sesuai dengan karakter masing-masing gitu. So class is special is that doesn't relate to specifically to a singular person, but a specific role. And we can move on to the next slide. We can find the analysis, issue, and theory of social class. And as you can see in this slide, there is analysis, issue, and theory of social class. According to the Karl Marx theory, this drama raises the issue of social class is in individualistic society. So this attitude further sharpens the gap that exists between different social classes. Thus, the social class that exists in society is the result of human creation. So whether consciously or unconsciously, and either directly or indirectly, form the pattern of a community life itself. So, Edward Albee chose two American citizens of different classes who could not be more different. There is Peter, who lives in well-established structures. So he is married, has two little daughters. He is satisfied with his situation. He represents the average middle-class wage earner, typically father of a family. And Peter lives in an apartment between Lexington and 3rd Avenue on 74th Street, a prosperous residential area in Manhattan. And Peter publishes textbooks in an executive position with a relatively high income. So Peter reflects the typical middle-class American with his anchor in traditional American value. So he has adapted himself to his environment. From my point of view, Peter is content with his social status. There will be no advancement from upper middle class to upper class, but there will also no relegation into lower middle class. But in contrast to Peter, Jerry is offbeat. He neither has a wife nor a family to live with, and he is totally lonely. As opposite to Peter, Jerry is not satisfied with his situation, and he wants to break out of it. This is explained when he describes his living conditions. He lives in a rooming house in a small room with beveled partition in wall, in which separates him from one of his neighbors. So the fact that Jerry has to share his room with someone else shows that he is very poor and not able to afford an apartment for his own. So Jerry doesn't fit into the mainstream and therefore he is seen as a social outsider. He doesn't represent the model American. He belongs to those people who exist in American society but whose existence is not subject for the conversation neither at home or television. So in my opinion, I'll be choose these two absolute contradictions to demonstrate the drastic situation. Peter, representative of white bourgeois, and Jerry, a representative of the disadvantaged, mirror discrepancy between rich and poor. And let me put the dialogue from them in the next slide. And yes, as you can see, this is the dialogue improvement from Jerry and Peter. As a result of creation of society, social class distinguishes in which class a person is grouped. Like Jerry said that. Now, I'll let you in on what happened at the zoo. But first, I should tell you why I went to the zoo. I went to the zoo to find out more about the way people exist with the animals and the way animals exist with each other and with the people too. And Jerry said in page 12. So it is the same as people in different social classes who are separated by a dividing line that cannot be seen but can be felt. So the social status of these characters indicates that the class difference between them is almost multi-layered. And this is the fact that we have to know. And we can move to the next slide. There is definition of family disintegration. So related to social class, this is an issue that we can take. Family disintegration. Family is a group of persons united by the ties of marriage, blood, or adoption, constituting a single household and interacting with each other in their respective social positions, usually those of spouses, parents, and children. The family performs various valuable functions for its member. So, family disintegration is one thing that doesn't want to be expected happen to anyone. So, we can find the theory in the next slide. So, there is family system theory that demonstrated that children's and adolescents' dysfunctional behavior often serve as important function within a larger system, usually that family. So, according to W.H. Watson in Encyclopedia of Behavior in 2012, family system theory is an approach to understand human functioning that focuses on interaction between people in a family and between the family and the context in which that family is embedded. According to a family system perspective, an individual's functioning is determined not so much by intra-psychic factors as by a person's place in the system in which her or she finds himself or herself, so subject to the purposes and pulls of the system, including competing emotional demands, role definitions and expectation, boundary and hierarchy issue, coalitions and collusions, loyalty conflicts, family and institutional culture and belief system, double blinds, projective identifications, and systematic anxiety. In addition, self-correcting and self-enforcing feedback loops in the system can either facilitate or hinder pathology or health, breakdown or resilience. So we can move to the next slide. There are analysis issue and theory of family disintegration. From the statement Jerry that sulks while Peter tells he is married and has 2 children, we can conclude that Jerry has a family disintegration. Why? Because although the family has very important role in determining the identity of the individual within the community, Peter has neither received support nor established a bond with his family. They both describe the same problem, but in opposite sides. For Peter, marriage was the social impositions that should be performed, but no for Jerry. Jerry defines marriage as the existence of the self and the existence of identity for every individual in the family. So, in other words, Jerry refused to recognize the sanctity of marriage and associate such concept with social norms. He also doesn't need to marry just because to be accepted by his society. And Jerry has even used the veiled marriage to his parents as a starting point of his discussion regarding the poor state of his family. But at the same time, he shows that he desired to have parents and feels sorry for himself because he cannot live with a typical family. So Jerry grew up with an alcoholic father and an adulterous mother who left her family to run away with her boyfriend. So after his father died in a bus accident, Jerry moved to live with his authoritarian aunt who died on the day of his high school graduation. So this one is dialect proven from Jerry. So the conversation between Jerry and Peter reveals that both of them are facing isolation in different ways. Jerry never had a family and was neglected by his parents, and he could not remember anything about them except for their deviant behavior that only brought his shame and humiliation. The situation in his family made Jerry lose his identity or meaning. So Jerry is meaningless, which was among the most important reasons why his life turned toward loss. On the other hand, Peter has a wife, children, and things that Jerry never had. However, he only started a typical, traditional family to establish a false identity in his community. In other words, Peter never truly identified himself with his family and only created a family only to satisfy the societal requirement of his community. This is the fact that we have to know. So the reason Jerry lived and had such views was the result of the impact of a broken family long ago. When the family system doesn't work well, it can affect the behavior and mindset of the person himself. So from Jerry said, "But good old mom and good old pop are dead, you know? I'm broken up about it too, I really mean." And yeah, it is how the way Jerry broken up until his suicide using a knife in the park. So, in the next slide, this is the last issue that I can take. There are social isolation. As you can see in this slide, definition of social isolation. According to Nicholson, he is defined isolation as a state in which the individual lacks a sense of belonging socially, lacks engagement with others, has a minimal number of social contacts, and there are deficient in fulfilling and quality relationships. Social isolation is also defined as the absence of relationships with family or friends on an individual level and with society on a broader level. And the next slide, we can find the theory. Yep, as you can see in this slide, theory of the social isolation. According to Fishman and Langman in 2010, there is aspect alienation, and one of aspect is social isolation. Is that mean social isolation terisolasi secara sosial di mana there is a feeling of solitude, rejection, and separation from group values, or relationship between group members. So it's possible because these feelings will make the individual concerned withdraw from his social life or don't feel a sense of belonging to a social group. So from the alienation theory that I have read before, the alienated labor in Karl Marx's manuscripts refers to forced and involuntary labor in which the worker finds no purpose, no pleasure or contentment, no needs fulfillment, no independence or power, no mental growth or physical development. This is a state in which as a person feels isolated, humiliated, unworthy, and insignificant. It is an operation that belongs to someone else, and it is not random, and it's simply a way of meeting the needs of physical life. And I can take one types of 4 types. They are really related to the characteristic of the zoo story. It's called the alienations of man from man or society. So the feeling of an outsider, of feeling a sense of isolation, strangers, or feeling of having no external connection is labeled as alienation. It is a sense of powerlessness, isolation, and meaninglessness experienced by human beings and feelings of being oppressed. And we can say that these are 3 parts of alienations. There are self-alienation. In this type, a man starts to reject his own self and doesn't accept that he causes self-annihilation, sad and depressed, like Jerry in his play. And there is alienation from species being. Is that mean they are just human beings? They don't like animals and behave for only their own species. And I think this is the same with Peter. And because he is a family man, but deep inside, his life is just life like anyone else. And the last one is alienation from other people. It seems like Jerry, right? Is that mean the man feels isolated from his own species, relatives, and associates? This spread from man to man and even a society. For if a man feels conflict with or inside himself, then he's often in conflict with others. And we can next into the next slide. There are analysis issue and theory of the social isolation. So, the author used dramatic characters to highlight the isolation to people from their communities and their lack of communication with others. Some factors, such as lack of communication, delusion, isolation, loneliness, materialism, and class distinctions in the community, represent the cage that surround humans and isolate them from one another. Humans also have animal instinct that greatly influence the formation of their personalities, and such instincts may reach dangerous levels and may even lead to their death, similar to what happened to Jerry in the play. So, although Jerry and Peter belong to 2 different classes in the society and are living different lives, they discover in their conversation that they are sharing the same sense of isolation and loss, but in different sides, yeah. Although Jerry and Peter belongs to 2 different classes in the society and are living different lives, they discover in their conversation that they are sharing the same sense of isolation and loss. Although Peter lives a normal life with a family and a job, he feels an inner sadness that is only revealed through the events in the play. In their condition, therefore, despite Peter's attempt to ignore Jerry, he eventually discovers that his life is meaningless. On the contrary, Jerry only aims to communicate with the human beings or an animal. Jerry's visit to the zoo before meeting Peter strongly suggests his desire to communicate and integrate himself with the outside world. And let me approve that dialogue of Jerry and Peter. As you can see in this slide, Jerry says that it's just that if you can deal with people, you have to make a start somewhere. With animals, don't you see? A person has to have some way of dealing with something. If not with people, something. With a bat, with a cockroach, with a mirror. No, that's too hard. That's one of the last steps. With a cockroach, with a carpet, a roll of toilet paper. No, not that. Either that's a mirror too. Always take bleeding. You see how hard it is to find things? With the street corners and too many lights, all colors reflecting on the only streets. With the waves of smoke with porn. So that is a picture that how loneliness Jerry is and how much he is isolated from society. And we have to pass the last issue that I tell you. Now, let's take a look at this conclusion. As you can see, after we all read the play and we read the issue and theory, we have to know that there is the implicit or explicit of the issue from the play. Many of issue that we can take. But yeah, it will take a long time if I put all of this. So from Jerry, we learned that he lives with the alienation theory. As we can see, he is very loneliness, homosexual, isolated himself to society, and representative as a disadvantage mirror the discrepancy between rich and poor. And all of this relate to many theory. And the opposite of Jerry, there is Peter, is a man who representative of the white burgess and live with the similar people in society. But as we know that the deep inside, he feels isolated and cannot be the person or the part as he wants to be. Yep, many things that we can learn from this play, right? And please take a look at the quotes. In the next slide, this is quote from Jerry. In the page 9, he said that we have to know the effect of our action. So from the Jerry said that we can conclude that whatever we do, there must have an effect, no matter how small it is. Just do it. And if you want to know more about this one, you can find it on the next slide. I attach my references. I hope it will help you more about the zoo story and issue and theory, of course. And the last one. Okay, this is my biography and enough from me. If you want to ask something, you can write or comment in this video. And I am Dea Mutiara Arhal from Pamulang University. I am sorry if there's a mistakes or grammatical errors. I hope I can give you the best, but I've tried my best. And I hope you guys understand about all the analysis from me and we can learn from the story. Take a good side and happy learning. Thank you and stay healthy, happy and wealthy. See you!